There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shoff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I am your host, Richard Shoff. The program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes of Kannapolis, North Carolina. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here only by the grace of God. Incidentally, I will deal with you personally if you want a nice log home. Just call and ask for me. I want to talk a little bit about Jim Jordan. Who's Jim Jordan? Well, he's a United States representative from the state of Ohio. He's that fellow that you see on Fox News, never wears a coat, always in his sleeves. Very articulate. He came into the House of Representatives with the Tea Party movement. He's now in the Freedom Council. He is a leader in the conservative cause in our U.S. House. He, along with Trey Gowdy and Representative Nunes, are primary antagonists against Rod Rosenstein. He was interviewed on Bret Baier's show on Fox News last Friday night and has been accused, well, let me just interject, he was a wrestling coach for 20 years, assistant wrestling coach for Ohio State, and the doctor that was a team doctor, now dead, was reportedly having improper contact with some of the wrestlers. And now Jim Jordan has been accused as assistant coach of knowing about it and not doing anything about it. He vehemently denies it. Now, the point of me talking about him today is not as to whether he is lying or not lying. I certainly hope he isn't. I share what our good president said of him. I think he's a great guy. But we're not here to talk about what may or may not have happened, but I am here to point something else out, and that is that we've got a despicable individual as Assistant Attorney General. Five former wrestlers have come out and accused Jordan. He's denied it vehemently. And just the timing of this whole thing is suspect to me. Our program, What in the World's Going On, is not breaking news. We're not even geared for it. That's obvious. But this is a current event that I want to bring out as to the timing of these accusations against Jim Jordan. A little background. Remember Trey Gowdy when he was talking to Rosenstein on the Capitol Hill meeting when he said, "Finish it the hell up"? A direct quote from Trey Gowdy. FBI Director Christopher Wray and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein were on Capitol Hill about a week ago, publicly testifying to the House Republicans over the FBI and DOJ's mishandling of Hillary's email investigation and Spygate. That Thursday, House Republicans held a vote and passed a resolution demanding that the Department of Justice comply with requests to turn over classified Trump Russia docs or face impeachment, face contempt. Pretty strong. Trey Gowdy, representative from South Carolina, torched Rosenstein, told him to show evidence of the Trump-Russia collusion or shut the investigation down because it was ripping the nation apart. Gowdy said Russia is not being hurt by this investigation, rather the U.S. is being torn apart. He said, and I'm quoting again, "If you have evidence of any wrongdoing by any member of the Trump campaign, present it to the damn grand jury." A direct quote from Trey Gowdy. Continuing, he said, "If you have evidence that this president acted inappropriately, present it to the people. Whatever you got, finish it the hell up," Gowdy told Rosenstein. Very forcefully. In another video clip, we've got Congressman Gowdy telling Rosenstein, "If you have more bias than I have ever seen manifest in a law enforcement officer in the 20 years that I've used it for a living." Trey Gowdy is a former national prosecutor, federal prosecutor. Of course, you can assume that Rosenstein and Mueller's plan is to drop an October surprise by releasing a report before the midterm elections as a way to muddle or prevent Republicans from picking up more seats. Rosenstein's smug attitude during Thursday's congressional hearing was completely unacceptable. And now we see why. I saw it, folks. He was one contemptible official. If I wasn't on the radio, I could more conveniently describe what I think of him. Contempt is all he had for the congressman. The deputy attorney general laughed at the GOP lawmakers and refused to answer questions by House Republicans. And here's where Jim Jordan comes in. He and Rosenstein had a fiery exchange during that hearing. Jordan reminded the deputy attorney general that he, quote, has 7 days to get his act together after the House voted on a resolution to compel the Department of Justice to comply with the document's request or face impeachment. Wow, pretty strong. Now do you see why I think the timing of this stinks to the high heaven? Well, anyway, is Rob Rosenstein blackmailing members of Congress? Think about it. Did not take long for Heinrich Himmler's lookalike, Rod Rosenstein, to get even with Representative Jim Jordan hardline questioning during the House Judiciary Committee. This is where Jordan and Rosenstein got into that heated discussion over Rosenstein's refusal. Now, and Rosenstein is a Republican, supposedly, but he's not even giving the House Republicans information they want. They're going to have to sue him to get it. Well, anyway, just days later, Representative Jim Jordan was named by Ohio State wrestler Mike DeSabato as having known about the alleged abuse of athletes by Dr. Richard Strauss, who was a team physician during the mid-'70s up to the late '90s. That's an accusation that Jordan quickly and vehemently has denied. Jordan, who was the assistant wrestling coach at Ohio State from '86 to '94, said he had no knowledge of the abuses during that time. Anyone with an IQ above moron can see that this accusation involving Jordan in this 20-year-old incident is payback from Rosenstein over Representative Jordan's hardline demand for evidence. Even something that should be more alarming to the American people is a distinct possibility that Rosenstein is digging up dirt on every representative who's demanding proof from him. While everyone waits on him to turn over the documents that he has, he's spending the time trying to find everything negative and anything negative he can on every lawmaker who's demanded answers from him. By threatening these lawmakers with possible career-ending dirt, he hopes to blackmail his way to an easy end of any demands made by Congress. This may well explain that smug look of confidence during the recent hearings, and I saw it in person on television. I saw it and realized how smug he was. He could be smug because he was already investigating the personal history of every member involved that was opposing him. Rosenstein, the same piece of garbage that's backing the Mueller investigation against my president, Donald Trump. In my opinion, he should be replaced. He is part of the swamp. He should be fired. He himself should be investigated. Folks, he is not a good man. He is an evil man. He is a corrupt man. Well, on to the next subject. In spite of everything that's against him, you know Trump has had a very good year so far in 2018. Remember back in the final days of the campaign ahead of the 2016 primary in the state of South Carolina? Then Republican nominee Donald Trump had held 3 different rallies. Feeding off the energy of the crowd, he delivered a classic Trump line. He said, and I'm quoting, "We're going to win so much, you're going to get tired of winning." He told this to thousands of supporters in the audience. You're going to say, "Please, Mr. President, I have a headache. Please don't win so much. This is getting terrible." And I'm going to say, no, we have to make America great again. It become one of the many classic quotes from the 2016 campaign season, one that supports would-be repeats with big smiles, and one that detractors would laugh about in dismissal as they mock the real estate tycoon's chances of ever becoming president. The notion of winning so much that people would get tired of it was obviously delivered tongue-in-cheek. But here we stand, folks, just over 2 years removed from those rallies, and supporters are beginning to enjoy a glimpse of what the now president predicted back then. So much winning in 2018. Most of us can agree that Trump has a unique strategy as a politician, and now as president. Whereas most political figures use the same cookie-cutter strategies, he goes against the grain. We see that in his constant Twitters, don't we? He uses provocative tweets and interesting tales to send the media into a frenzy, and boy, he can do it. Then, having gotten the media to yammer about issues that don't really matter, he gathers his team and goes to work, unimpeded by reporters and commentators who are busy booking segments on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. While Trump's strategy is genius, it has had at least one interesting side effect. When the Trump administration accomplishes something of substance, it often goes unnoticed. Of course, that would be intentional by our very biased media. Then, when it becomes far less sensational than the TMZ stories, like the media goes after in the moment, this is where they're worried about Stormy the Slut Davis, while Trump is trying to keep nukes out of North Korea and hitting the United States, when he's trying to set up a meeting with Putin, the second most powerful nation in the world, when he's trying to get Supreme Court justices, conservative ones, appointed, and they're all worried. Well, the reality is that the Trump administration has strung together an impressive series of victories in 2018. If most American liberals could slow down enough to push aside their personal hatred for our president, they'd find that, in the words of Trump himself, there's so much winning going on right now, folks. There's so much winning. But since the media would rather talk about porn stars, conspiracies, theories, and celebrity opinions on political matters, you won't have a ton of opportunities to hear about these wins on cable news or in the major newspapers or magazines. Of course, they won't put too many of them in either, will they? Dig around a little bit, and you'll find plenty of victories. Here's just a few of the accomplishments that have taken so far in this year, 2018. I see where unemployment is again reaching historical lows. When he was running for president, one of Trump's big promises was that he'd get the economy back on track, create jobs, and lower unemployment. The data shows he's doing just that. As of last count, last Friday, a couple days ago, the national employment rate is hovering around 4%. That's down a half a percentage point in comparison to this time last year. Even more impressive is the fact that Afro-American unemployment has shrunk from 7.8% at Trump's inauguration to just over 5.9%. To put that in perspective, African-American unemployment was at 12.7% when Obama was inaugurated. It then swelled to 16.5% in April of 2011, before closing at 7.9% when he handed the reins over to Trump. Now again, folks, 5.9%. It's also hard to discount some of the aggressive policies he's enacted in order to put people back to work. Recently, Trump signed into action an executive order that makes it easier for military spouses to find jobs in their area. You know, they move around all the time, so they don't have any seniority. So when somebody hires them, they know they're going to be there short period, so they don't have to pay them as much. They don't have to hire them. Well, considering that the unemployment rate for military spouses is typically 4 or 5 times the national rate, actions like these have got a big impact. He made it much easier for them to get a job. We've got progress on the Korean Peninsula. Secretary of State Pompeo, as I'm talking to you today, just left North Korea. His 3rd trip there, another one planned. 4th one is scheduled. He's over in Japan right now talking to our allies today. I don't know what's going to happen. It's too soon to make predictions on Korea. History shows that talks with the North Korea regime can deteriorate at any moment. They lie all the time. The situation appears to be as much better shape than now than it was 1, 3, or even 5 years ago. Time will tell if the recent summit was another interesting footnote or the start of something truly historic. But at least they're not exploding missiles. They're not threatening to nuke Guam or Hawaii. Haven't for the past few months. I think some progress might be being made. Trump gave us historic tax reform. Depending on who you ask, there's certain pros and cons to the tax cuts and the Jobs Act. But it's hard to ignore the dollars and cents of the across-the-board tax cut. You know, the typical family of four earning $73,000 a year, they're going to save over $2,000 next year on the tax cut. No matter how much Democrats like Pelosi and Debbie Wasserman Schultz calls these refund crumbs, the fact is the vast majority of Americans will see more money in their pockets over the next few years. Replace the Trump name with Obama, and the detractors will be praising this tax plan as a historic reform. And you know, Trump has given us massive regulatory cuts. He declared his intentions to cut regulations to the pre-60s level. People laughed then. But it's only been a year and a half of his presidency. He's made a lot of progress on that front, too. It's hard to calculate the exact number, but the White House has reported that the Trump administration has eliminated 22 rules for every new rule it's enacted. In total, federal agencies have issued 67 deregulatory actions while imposing just 3 new ones. The result? $570 million in savings per year. That's $8.1 billion in lifetime net regulatory cost savings. And you never hear about this one because this is well hidden by the mainstream media. His attack on sex trafficking. Did you know, folks, that there's an estimated 20 to 30 million slaves in the world today? Or that as much as 80% of all human trafficking involves sexual exploitation? What about the fact that between 600,000 and 800,000 humans are trafficked across international borders each year, and that over half of these victims are children? The Trump administration has made a point to tackle human trafficking and sex trafficking in particular. Yes, they've done better than any administration that has preceded it. In April of this year, Trump signed a bill that gives federal and state prosecutors the power to pursue websites that host sex trafficking ads. Did you hear anything about it? On CNN or MSNBC or the New York Times? Didn't think so. Well, the legislation has already brought it into Backpage.com. They laundered tens of millions of dollars and sold teenage girls on that site. And folks, what about our Supreme Court? Well, it's on the front page of everything, even the liberal press. They can't wait to see who's going to get nominated. But you better believe they'll be again it, folks. But he's turned around our Supreme Court, and it's only going to get better. And in addition to that, the federal judges he's appointed, as far as we know, everyone's a conservative. History's being made, and it'll be in effect for generations to come. There's a lot of winning going on right now. People ought to be encouraged to do their own research and start thinking for themselves. Many will like what they're going to find out there. It's kind of interesting, folks. Another view on some things that have recently happened that the Trump administration has brought about. This comes from Dave Hodges, Too Good to Miss. He points out that the empire, so to speak, can't win the next election. Barring a miracle, the Democrats and the hashtag Never Trumpers are done. Anti-Trump candidates are getting destroyed in their own primaries. The empire is unquestionably on the run, but it's ready to strike back, folks. Trump and his allies, who are allies, average American citizens, we've got the evil globalists on the run. Only Trump stands between the globalists and complete New World Order dominance. And don't forget it, listeners. Trump and his supporters have already done a few things, and Hodge is going to point them out, parallel to what we've been talking about, the Trump victories. Just going to mention a few. Peace is breaking out in Korea. The globalist-motivated war with Russia over Syria and Iran hasn't begun, folks. American manufacturing is revitalized. Unemployment is at a high, 2-decade high, our employment. American factories are reopening. Trump is removing America from bad trade deals that only benefit the globalists. Trump is dismantling Obamacare piece by piece without a whole lot of help from the Republican Congress. Trump has provided increased security on the border and would do even more if our, quote, good Republicans in Congress would support it. Trump is rebuilding our military. The Republican pro-Trump candidates are sweeping the primary elections. And the one thing that globalists fear the most, Trump is prosecuting an increasing number of child sex trafficking rings. But despite the fact that the deep state and the globalists are on the run, the New World Orders will strike back. What are we going to do in America when the empire strikes back? What's going to happen? What will the empire strike back? How? Will it be an EMP attack? A chemical or a biological attack? An artificial food shortage? A currency collapse? World War III? Are you ready? We better get ready. What can we do? The most important thing we can do, good listeners, is pray. God gave us our president and our vice president. He's on our side, and we're on his. Let's continue to pray for our president and his safety. There is a final push to invoke violence, and it's running right up to the November election. Have you noticed how much more violent and ruthless the left is becoming? Lots of the alternative media, the real news, have picked up on this and have been recently reporting with some alarming developments. We've seen them, but I want to just read a few headlines from the past few days and weeks so you can see the impending violence that faces us. A few of the headlines. Leftists call for Trump supporters to be gunned down in restaurants. James Woods warns conservatives, get armed and vote. Your life depends on it. Here it comes, the warnings about a civil war in America. They're becoming much louder. America is now in a civil war. Maxine Waters calls for attacks on White House employees. Trump prepares Rex 84 martial law plan to stop the fall of the United States. Red alerts, prepare to defend yourself. Mad Max mob mentality goes critical as celebs, Dem politicians, and liberal media actively incite violence against conservatives. Ready to rumble? Maxine calls in the mob. Trump aides urged to get their guns. Staffers and allies are warned, watch their backs. Left-wing writers suggest anti-Trump protesters should carry out domestic terror attacks. One U.S. congressman says U.S. is heading towards a second civil war. Iowa Republican rep says America is heading toward another war. Civil this time. Comedian TV writer threatens Donald Trump Jr.'s 4-year-old daughter. We're coming for you, Shiley. Antifa spreads list of ICE agents. We covered that last week. Peter Fonda tweets he wants to rip Barron Trump from his mother and put her in a cage with pedophiles. This is what they're saying, folks. Violent socialist verbally assaults DHS secretary in restaurant. We covered that. America's heading in the direction of another Harper's Ferry. Quote from Steve King, U.S. Representative from Iowa. After that, he says, comes Fort Sumter. The left, no longer being the left of decades ago, are now identified as a radical group of socialist, Marxist, progressive, globalist rabble-rousers apparently at their wits' end. Folks were urgently in dangerous times. They were certain that they had that last presidential all wrapped up, and they've never accepted Trump as their president, and that's why they're hollering so much. What's worse is their well-funded and relentless ongoing attack on this president, any and all of his supporters, and every single thing that embodies the ideals thereof. And what are those basic ideals? How about these, folks? America first, border security, patriotism, love of country, upholding the law and the Constitution, getting the government out of the way whenever possible, jobs for U.S. citizens, fair trade, support of American manufacture. In other words, the things that are traditionally American. And the new left hates this. With all the important midterm elections coming up in November, which traditionally favor the opposite party of whoever's in the White House, that goes on for a long time, the left and their propaganda outlets are in apparent rabid frenzy. Did you notice the ramping up of distractions just as the Inspector General report came out? Why? Well, because you could see that report and the potential coming indictments are not good at all for the left, the deep state, the private administrations, the previous administration's command and control. Trump must be taken out at all cost, is their mantra. Things are getting hot. Personally, my biggest concern is at this point is a false flag of some sort which will blame the patriots for the action. The left desperately want the first shot to be publicly come from the right to leverage moral ground on what will come next. I fear the extremely well-funded nonprofit groups and the other dark entities may successfully instigate a violence from which there's no turning back. The mainstream news media will drool all over themselves as they promote the narrative that American patriots are the terrorists, even if it's false flagged. Decades of relentless efforts have finally brought about an army of progressive, socialist, Marxists of sufficient numbers to threaten our republic, the republic for which we stand. Our enemy is not within geographical bounds. Unlike our first Civil War, where geographical boundaries were defined and clear battle lines were drawn, today's emerging Civil War has no clear boundaries. Rather, the boundaries are those of political ideals which unfortunately don't mix. It's kind of like oil and water. The likes of Maxine Waters and the rest of her anti-American movement are loudly beating their drums, folks. They're beginning to take physical action. This thing is heating up. They feel that this is it. The November elections, if they lose in a big red wave, they're finished. If we lose in a big blue wave, folks, we're in deep doo-doo. I haven't a clue as to what might happen as we progress through the next several months, but I'd suggest that you stay in touch with what's happening. How are you going to do that? Well, not much of the regular media, but Fox is basically pretty good. Hannity is great. Judge Jeanine on Saturday night. Rush Limbaugh on AM radio. For the most part, I shut off the mainstream propaganda. Can't really stomach it. But there's a few good places, and the alternative news is a great source. And hopefully, it's time to put the Democrat Party on suicide watch. There perhaps has never been a time when the Democrats did a better job of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. After being well ahead in the generic congressional polls, those numbers collapsed early this year along with the Trump-Russia collusion narrative. Since then, the leftists have been flailing about desperately trying to find an issue. The first act was stripping the Second Amendment rights after the Parkland mass shooting, starring soy boy Camera Hogg. Democrats, infamous for short, childlike memories, obviously forgot that this issue might have cost Al Gore the 2000 election. They don't remember that. And gun grabbing doesn't poll well any better right now. The second act is the treatment of those invading our country. You know, the illegal immigrants. Mentioned this last week. Their latest to star a hapless little Honduran girl used by a human prop by Time magazine. Never mind that her father had a good job back home as a boat captain. Now related to this, Democrats have a new issue. Let's abolish the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. A week ago, this was recognized as a fringe idea even among staunch Democrats. But the fringiest fringe around, then something happened. One Alexandria Cortez shocked the Democrat establishment by defeating the 20-year incumbent, House Democrat caucus Joe Crowley. That's the Democrat primary in New York's 14th district. We talked about it. She ran in part on abolishing ICE. So now this has become the new rallying call for 2020 Democrats. Now, I really shouldn't say this. I really shouldn't. But I have nothing more for the Democrats. I just hope they keep marching toward that cliff. If the leftists think their avowed socialist Cortez win had anything to do with abolishing ICE, you're putting your electoral chances on ice, folks. She won largely for a simple reason. That reason was bigotry. I hope they keep that up. It's a rallying point. If they'll keep that point up to get rid of ICE, to get rid of Border Patrol, don't build a wall, if they'll keep Nancy Pelosi in her position of leadership of the Democrats in the House, we're not doing too bad. What can we do to ensure that they don't become successful? Continue your prayers for our presidency, for our president, for the leadership around him, for his ideas, for his selection on cabinet officials, Pray for him as you never have before. This is our time to stand with our president as we have never stood for him before. Not only his life, but our republic is in jeopardy. God bless until next week.